All right, it is. All right, we are here with Louise Potter, the broker of eXp Ohio. Hey, Louise.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Got cold outside.
I know, boo. It's terrible. So you want to talk about commissions?
No, I really don't want to talk about commissions. I want to talk about people who talk about commissions.
All right, let's hear it. So you are allowed to talk about commissions. You're just not allowed to collude.
You're not allowed to collude, or you're not allowed to disparage somebody's business practices, or, go down those roads.
Okay.
It kind of goes back to keyboard warriors, and I see this a lot in sites out there. There are sites where we all get together, and it's kind of like we're all sitting around in a room talking, and we're not thinking about the fact that we're putting stuff in writing, and it's out there in perpetuity.
Right.
What you say stays out there no matter what you do.
Right.
So I think back, I've been in the business long enough to remember the days when buyer brokerage came along. Okay, I'm really glad we didn't have social media in those days, because that would have been a hot topic. Because agency laws have been around since the dawn of time, but buyer brokerage became codified in the late 80s, early 90s. Became part of the code of Ohio law.
Okay.
And we had brokers who were appalled about the thought of buyer brokerage.
Right, because before it was everybody represented the seller.
Right, we were all sub-agents. My listing, you were an agent of the seller, even if you were at a different company. So buyer brokerage was really foreign.
Okay.
And they decided they were not going to pay a buyer broker as much as they would somebody who was a sub-agent.
Okay.
So a group of them got together.
Uh-oh, that's colluding.
And that's an uh-oh. That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
They disparaged the business practices of others who were buyer brokers, and decided not to pay them as much because they were a buyer broker. The thing is,
what were they? I'm sorry to digress, but do you remember why they thought having a buyer being represented by their own agent was a problem? What were they saying?
It was different.
That's it. But were there any what was the pushback? Just that it was different, or that there was a problem? They thought it was wrong, or they thought it was
sub-agents, everybody was liable in a transaction, whereas buyer broker split that liability. I never had a problem with buyer brokerage. I didn't understand why. Quite frankly, there was an issue.
Okay, got it. So what are you seeing recently that is causing you to feel like, oh, this seems very much like
I think social media has allowed us to say and do things that we normally if you and I were sitting at a table drinking a beer together, we wouldn't say some of the things we say on social media. We get behind the keyboard and we're safe.
Right.
So it's not something that I'm seeing a huge problem with. This is just a reminder to agents, because this is federal law. This applies every place.
Right.
So you have to be really careful what you say. I remember too, when limited service brokerage came along, and people didn't like the fact that you would be negotiating with the seller, and they talked about that business practice. Well, she'll this person will only pay this amount, and so we're all only going to pay her this amount together. Right. Now, it's one thing if you as a broker say, my policy for my company is we're going to pay you what you pay us. Yeah. But it's when I say, okay, XYZ and QRX brokerages, we're all going to get together and do that. So you have to be really careful talking about business practices.
Well, and I think too, if we're doing a specific example, one thing that comes to mind is Zillow has been in the media recently a lot, and there's been some celebration of their kind of issues. But the thing is like they are actually a brokerage. So
Exactly.
it is like a violation of, and my understanding is that it is a violation of the code of ethics
Mhm.
if you're a realtor to celebrate publicly other brokerages like problems, right?
Absolutely, 100%. That's not necessarily antitrust, but that falls under Article 15 of the Code of Ethics. It's a
Right.
violation of the Code of Ethics. So yeah, but if we disparage Zillow's business practice publicly,
Yeah.
Well,
Well, I know, wasn't there like a big deal? Like there was an agency, I forget what they were called, that they weren't paying any commission to a buyer's agent. And it was like in the MLS that they weren't getting, I mean, this was the whole problem, right? That it was in their MLS that they weren't paying any commission to the buyer's agent, that it had to be negotiated either in the contract, which it's not really allowed to be negotiated in the contract, right?
it's not supposed to be, no. But if I suppose if both buyers and sellers and everybody agrees, it's a violation of the Code of Ethics. It could be a violation of state license law. But if it's out there, it's been published, and everybody agrees to it, and that's what you have to do to get the deal done, that's what you have to do.
Okay.
If it's an individual brokerage and that is their business practice, that's their business practice.
But then if you own a brokerage, you can say, well, we will, as a brokerage, we're only gonna pay you what you pay us. That's okay. We just can't say, hey, I'm a brokerage, you're a brokerage, your other person's a brokerage. Let's all only do this.
Yeah, right. As a broker, I can send a letter to that other brokerage, putting them on notice
Okay.
that, this is what we're going to do, my individual brokerage. So,
Okay.
That's fine. But if I call,
Other
Reflex
brokers,
Realty and
right.
and Pete's Partners Realty,
Right.
and say, we're all going
Let's
to get
all
together.
do this.
Let's all do this. It's a great idea.
So then let's talk about when there is a question about commission, because sometimes in those groups they say, hey, what would you charge for this? And you do have a handful of people that say we're not allowed to talk about commissions. But that is not true. That is not correct.
Well, I think the fear is if you start down that path,
It's hard to stop.
It's hard to stop. And that's where you don't want to go. And that's why,
Okay.
if we're in a board meeting at the realtor, at the board of realtors, and commission discussions start, that's why it's immediately, stop.
Because that could be seen as collusion.
Right.
But you could respond and say, hey, look, everybody charges differently. And no.
Commissions are variable. Commissions are variable. And, it's up to each individual and up to each brokerage to decide what they choose to charge.
But but there has to be a line too, where if somebody is truly looking for the answer, right? Like that answer is fine, but it's not helpful. Like if I want to know, like if I'm new or whatever, and I want to know like what other people charge and their thought process behind it, not with an intention of collusion, but to understand what people are charging and why.
I don't want to be standing in a court of law defending myself because I asked that question.
Right, exactly.
My answer to you is, hey, Jennifer, you know what? You really should sit down and talk to your broker.
Yeah.
Talk to the other agents in your brokerage. Talk to your broker. Let's not put it out here in a public forum.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think that's good though for everybody. Like, be careful what you post, but it's almost like you don't know it's bad until like afterwards and you're like, oh shit.
Yeah. Whoops. That didn't go where I wanted it to.
Well, because in your head, it's like one thing, you have this intention, right? And then all of a sudden it like makes a hard left and you're like, what happened? Like, how did we get here?
You can't reel that back in,
No, like erase button.
I feel like my entire life as a broker is spent thinking the long view,
Yeah.
If I'm standing in front of that judge, I have to explain why we did that, so, my whole point with everything we're even talking about is think before you speak, think before you post.
That's no fun, Louise.
I know we're a rather spontaneous bunch, but that's okay. But, if you don't like, if I'm mad at you and I think you just have done a horrible job with a transaction and, you should be punished. You should be in stocks out in front of the office
Yeah.
for a week. Don't put it on Facebook.
Right, exactly.
Don't
Yeah,
put it out there where it stays forever.
I think it's solid advice in general, but especially when we are talking about business practices inside of real
Yes.
estate, and it can be viewed as disparaging to another brokerage or agent. And also if it could be misconstrued as collusion, right?
Yeah,
with
just
their
don't
things.
discuss somebody's business practices. Plain and simple, just don't. Don't post pictures of somebody's 60 funky house online and say, oh my gosh, look at what I showed today. This place is a disaster. Did you have permission to do that? Did you have it in writing?
Right. Right.
all
Can you
of it.
defend it in court? I got it.
Yes, share it at the table, drinking a beer. Don't put it on Facebook.
Yeah, I get it. Well, Louise,
Yeah.
if people have a question for you, and they want to get a hold of you, obviously, if they're at EXP, they can go into the workplace. But what's a better way if they're not at EXP?
They can reach out to me by email, Louise, Louise .Potter, Potter, just like Harry,
Hey.
at exprealty.net, net. So
Perfect.
that's my email address, or my phone, 614-226-6981.
Awesome. I appreciate you being on. Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.
See ya. Bye-bye.